Hello and welcome to Women in Cloud Summit celebrating International Women's Day. As we reflect on the progress that women have made in entrepreneurship and technology, we still face challenges. And during the past year, the pandemic has exposed a significant gender disparity when it comes to job losses and economic hardship. In fact, 2 million women have lost jobs since COVID-19, and 179,000 of those jobs were lost just in this last December 2020 alone. And overall, McKinsey and Company estimate that women's jobs are almost twice as vulnerable to crisis than men's jobs. Furthermore, digitization and the acceleration of the needs for new jobs and new skills and new technology skills are ever facing. And it's projected that by the next year, 27% of the roles will be net new due to technology, and 44% of employees are going to require some reskilling or upskilling. And so now women in particular may be at risk of changing their jobs due to automation. And it's estimated that up to 24% of total women employed globally will need to change jobs due to automation over time. And so as we look to improve these opportunities for women and preparing them for an increasingly digitized world, we see systemic barriers to fostering economic empowerment. Joining me today to discuss these challenges and how we can break down these barriers is Jacky Wright, Chief Digital Officer for Microsoft US. Thank you so much for being here, Jacky.
Thank you, Gretchen. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
As am I. And we've had these conversations actually in the past. Jacky has been a strong and advocate speaker for women in technology and has had a very impressive career in technology. And I'm sure you're keenly aware of the challenges that we face as women in this industry. And so, Jacky, maybe to tell the audience to start with, just tell us about your journey and how you were able to overcome obstacles and what advice would you give this audience?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about quite a lot of things. It could be quite the story, but to kind of break it down into kind of tranches. I think about my early career, my early life, and who influenced me, how confidence was instilled in me. And as a young girl, I think early on I needed that confidence. My father played a key role. My mother and father played a key role in helping me really think that I could do and be anything, which was really the launch pad for me to go into and do things that I would have never dreamed I would have been able to do. I moved from the UK to the US, and how to adapt to a different environment, how to fit in. And again, we as natural human beings and girls, I think even more so, wanting to fit in, to be liked, and spending time really trying to do that. I think I really had a hard time, and trying to learn that was a key skill that I really needed to have, how to adapt in an environment. I went to university here, and I got a job in a bank, and it's a common story now. Probably everyone knows this story about me going over to the computer and automating my little manual work process, which then also taught me about really wanting to be this problem solver and really trying to differentiate myself. And at the end of that, going into a computer department where there was only one woman in there, and that woman took me under her wing. She mentored me. She helped me understand how to navigate this male-dominated environment, and who to look out for, who not to look out for, who was going to derail me. I mean, she just taught me everything about this environment. And that important mentoring and sponsorship was another key lesson for me in terms of how I built my career. And then along the way, I decided I needed to move to California just because. And as a young person, you don't really have a plan, but my plan was I wanted to see the world, and so I did that. And then you get to this stage of where you get married and you have kids, and what do you do and how do you navigate that? And I think for me, I've had to overcome many challenges making a decision about what was important relative to, was it more important to focus on the children versus focusing on my career, and making these hard choices that we as people, and women in particular, have to make. And so those are a series of things which are a combination of career life choices, real life choices around family, and how they converge has been really at the core of me as a woman, me as an individual, really thinking about my career all up.
It's incredible, Jackie. I mean, you mentioned a few, I mean, mentioned many obstacles that I think our viewers see and face every day. And you talked about the role of mentors and even family and what that was able to do to help you sort of early in career. I mean, I think as my journey back, I summarize in those kind of two areas too. I call it like perception and then community. And the perception was just trying to overcome what people might perceive you to be based on your appearance, just based on sort of who you were versus what skill you actually could provide. And then community, I was also the only female in, sort of my first sort of technical role. In fact, one of the only females in my engineering role at school even. And the challenge is really trying to find a community of people of like you, of same interests that can really support you, in your growth. And so I think while we've come a long way around gender equality, certainly, and we're closing the gender gap, we just still have, so much more to do. And when I think about that important role, Jackie, you mentioned on your mentor, the lack of female mentors all up and sponsors to really help our entrepreneurs succeed is just so evident, from the classroom all the way to the boardroom. And I think you just outlined your journey beautifully for what we all sort of face. And so when I think about the classroom, and I mentioned earlier the challenge of digitization and the growing skills gap that we're seeing, especially impacted on women. How do you think about, or how should we make education more accessible?
So I think there are various lenses to this multifaceted problem, because there's the problem of access. And let's start with access. And when you think about it, you don't naturally think about barriers to access to education and learning. But whether it be in an underserved community where you may not have access to broadband, you may not have access to a device, to a remote location where girls have to walk miles to go to school, and just think about what they could be exposed to on their way to school, there and back. How do we remove those things? And so we start with this access. And that's where, for us, we need to really think about how we mitigate and provide those things so that women, girls have access. Then there's this notion of what can I be and who can I be? And I've never thought, just putting it in, I never thought that I would be a senior technologist at Microsoft. Who in the world would have thought that would have been me? I'm not, it's definitely not Jackie. And so this notion of building awareness and what you're exposed to is also something. When we don't get into the skills yet, you think about the exposure. Well, do you realize that as someone working in retail, technology is key to what you're doing? When you think about nursing, when you think about archaeology, I mean, all the skills that you could be, a philanthropist, all that you use data, just think about how you help build exposure and
Yeah,
awareness. And so then you move from this awareness to then how you apply it. And then
right.
how do we focus on, one, the curricula being fit for purpose? We understand removing those barriers and the exposure. And now us as a community, government, local, private, public sector, really pulling together to make sure the curricula is fit for purpose for the skills that are needed in the future. And then we tailor the learning experience around how you collaborate, how you use your EQ, how girls may need to think about confidence building, and the point about perception, and creating that inclusive environment for learning, to
Right.
then get to a place of where now you've created not just the skills, but you've created the emotional parts that create the success, the passion, the need to learn, the curiosity, and the environment for success. And all of those things come together when you think about skilling.
It's such a good point, Jackie. And when you really brought leadership to Microsoft to think about what access really means in the community, and coalitions such as Women in Cloud, think about that Tech Bridge, another great example around, a group that's really focused around breaking the cycle of generational poverty through education and bringing those wraparound services together. And so it's one of those things that oftentimes I think we forget when we start to bring education, and bringing that conversation to bear here is so important, because we all here can get involved to be able to help to really remove or reduce some of those barriers. And certainly we're committed to doing that, especially in some of the initiatives such as Accelerate that we're doing here at Microsoft. Well, shifting gears a little bit, to women entrepreneurs, there's challenges, right? You talked about access. Certainly access to opportunity, access to capital are a couple things that our women entrepreneurs certainly, experience today. And enterprise tech is one of the actually fastest growing and most influential sectors in the industry. It's expected to reach 500 billion this year. And so by that number alone, you would think that our women female entrepreneur opportunity would be just enormous. And yet, really, Jacky, we're only seeing about 2% of that opportunity venture funded for female entrepreneurs today. And so we see these hurdles. We see these hurdles in education that you just outlined. We see these hurdles in access again for women entrepreneurs. They're sort of tied together. And so if you think about sort of the pipeline when you just talked about education and now sort of the opportunity in the workforce, how do you think, or how do you see women breaking through this barrier of access and getting into those opportunities of the 500 billion ahead of us?
I start from a position that says a community can be transformed through women. When women start businesses, a whole community thrives. There is data to show that, whether you're in a remote location of the world or whether you're in a developing location, it is quite evident. And so there's something here about how we ensure that the people who have power and influence understand the value proposition for making sure that women can start and run and own their businesses. And I think today, if I look at where we're going in terms of the new opportunities we have relative to digital transformation, the new business opportunities we have, when you think about the problems in the world that we need to solve, women are at the heart of that. And so this notion of VCs really focusing on women, investors really focusing on women. I look at some of the big VC companies today and I put the challenge to them. Why do you not have more women starting their own companies? Why do you not invest more in women? And I do think it is changing. I
Yeah.
think it is changing in a way that we've never seen before. I think even as you look at some of these venture capital companies, a lot of them are women companies. And so
Right.
just think again, this notion of power and influence, the shifting nature of power and influence means we will have a more diverse and a more inclusive environment relative to entrepreneurship. Women in cloud, let's look at that. That in itself is a key focus group, focused on women, focused on entrepreneur, focused on economic mobility and empowerment with the community at core. And so I think more of these forums are what we need. I say we're starting to get them. I also say that people are recognizing the power of women, and when women are either in the boardroom, at the table as the CEO, or owning a business, just look at what happens.
Yeah. You're so spot on, Jacky, and interesting. Both you leading the charge around this narrative. I mean, I always say investing in women isn't a charity; it's good business. And I think your point is this: the stats are certainly there to support that. When you have diversity of thought, you can have innovation in a way that we've never really seen before. And so, this is the start. This is how we have the ability to change the narrative with the audience here collectively creating economic access for women and opportunities when we can join together and have these conversations and sort of change the dialogue. And one of those things I know, Jacky, you've talked a lot about is really the need for apprenticeships, not just an internship, but real apprenticeship where you're really bringing in diverse talent. And so, we see that is, not only just in the entrepreneur side, but we can see like breaking into the supply chain is a barrier for female entrepreneurs just due to the lack of diversity that we're seeing out there. And so, how do you think about what's your thoughts around that and overcoming that hurdle in the supply chain?
So, spot on when you think about manufacturing and supply chain in general, we tend to think about it as a male dominated industry. We think about, we envision the manufacturing shop floor. We envision that, the supervisor male dominated, and we even think the owners of those companies to be male dominated. But the changing nature of the work is that, it's becoming more value add. It is now, in terms of technology being infused in there, requires more collaboration. It requires higher analytical skills. It requires an EQ to collaborate more. It requires more diversity of thought, because now we have to think about supply chains in a whole new way. And who better to have those skills than women? And so I would really think about, as you start to hire for those roles, where can you get diversity of thought? Where can you get a naturally inclusive environment, analytical skills, EQ to collaborate? Even as you think about the types of businesses that are needed now, you can start up a business and in the supply chain with very low, hardly any infrastructure. You just need an idea. You can get a cloud service to provide for you. You can get someone to manufacture something for you. I mean, just think about how you start. Everybody can play in this game today. So it is not as the manually intensive as we once thought it to be. We've now morphed into a supply chain that uses now things that we would have never thought we needed before, and hence the barrier to entry is somewhat removed.
Right, right. It's such a good point on the importance of what Women in Cloud is trying to do, is making sure that our female entrepreneurs really have the digital skills, the digital infrastructure to be able to play, to your point, in a place where many of those barriers are now certainly removed. And we're in a virtual world, Jacky, right? I mean, you've always had sort of a global remit. Women in Cloud, as you know, started in the US, but the reality is expanded globally. We're in Europe, India, Middle East, Africa, Canada, and just making some amazing progress, both removing those barriers, creating policy, and then ultimately, to your point, making sure that the education and access is there so that we can tap into that sort of billion-dollar opportunity that's available for us here. And so I think the thing that is just so powerful you're talking about is just what we can do when we think about a society that's accessible, it's inclusive, it's fair. You kind of talked about breaking down those silos. And, we really believe that we will build a full pipeline from education all the way to entrepreneurship and really be able to change the game. And your leadership globally on this, Jacky, is phenomenal to help us along the way. And so I think just in final thoughts, is there anything for you in terms of you'd like the audience to take away around creating change and economic empowerment for women?
Yeah, and I think we're at an inflection point as a society where the heart and soul of who you are really needs to come to bear. As you think about what we've been experiencing this past year, almost 2 years now, and how the world has become a smaller place because we've had to rely on each other, just think about the opportunity you have with your moral compass to really change the landscape, focusing on social impact, environmental impact, and really improving lives of individuals. And women naturally have that nurturing, that wanting to do good, as we think about our lives, both personally and professionally. Now's the time. And so I would encourage each and every one of you to use your moral compass to then drive what passion you have around creating a business, creating a community, collaborating on a global scale to make monumental seismic change to the world. I just think we are at an inflection point where women rock, and we can actually do this. So
We
I
can.
just want to say, thank you, Gretchen, for having me. It's been a
Oh
really
my gosh.
engaging conversation. Thank you.
Jacky, your words of wisdom, your inspiration, I know the audience has been able to really be able to look at what you've been able to provide us is so valuable. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an incredible conversation, very inspiring. We can all take action, and we will. And so I'd just like to thank you again. And I'd like to thank the audience for joining us on this session. I hope you found this discussion to be beneficial in your own journey, and we are here for you. So please join if you have not Women in Cloud. We are here to help you create economic opportunity and empowerment for all. Thanks very much.